Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me here. I'm Brazen Eagle, and today, from UPI.com, House of Representatives votes to raise federal hourly minimum wage to $15. Okay. So, from July 18th, the House passed legislation Thursday to gradually raise a federal hourly minimum wage, which has been set at $7.25 for a decade, to $15 by 2025, about 6 years from now. House members voted 231 to 199 in favor of the Raise the Wage Act. Just 3 Republicans, Representatives Francis Rooney of Florida, Chris Smith of New Jersey, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania joined Democrats in approval. 6 Democrats, Representatives Joe Cunningham of South Carolina, Anthony Brindisi of New York, Kendra Horn of Oklahoma, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Zoti Torres Small of New Mexico, and Ben McAdams of Utah voted against the proposal. The bill aims to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, but will face a tough road in the GOP-controlled Senate. Thursday was the first time the House has moved to raise a federal minimum wage since 2007, which raised it to $7.25. Most states, however, have set minimums far beyond that level. The vote occurred after much debate between progressives and centrists to reach a compromise over issues of hike size, timeline, and flexibility. A Congressional Budget Office study this month projected raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour would raise wages for 17 million workers and lift 1.3 million people out of poverty, but cost another 1.3 million their jobs. The analysis cited a 2/3 chance the difference in employment would fall between no jobs lost and 3.7 million jobs lost. Thursday's vote is a win for progressives and put centrists in line with the Fight for 15 campaign many of the party's presidential candidates have embraced. Some critics of the bill argue the cost will be greater than the benefit. House Democrats show that they put party politics over jobs by voting for an unprecedented wage mandate, which even the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office shows could eliminate up to 3.7 million jobs. Samantha Summers, communications director of the Employment Policies Institute, a conservative nonprofit think tank, said, "This bill will only hurt those it is intended to help by killing jobs and forcing businesses to close." And that thus concludes this article. So, the House voted yes to eventually raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by, of course, 2025. Okay, but who benefits, who really benefits, and who really loses in this situation? Is this a net win for everyone, or is this ultimately a net loss for the people, or even perhaps no real gain for anyone? It's, all economics. There's pros and cons to everything. So, some corporations, like Costco, even claim that they want to raise the legal minimum wage. This is kind of interesting. So, now, what effect would raising the minimum wage do? In theory, and, it is supposed to pay the lowest earners more for their labor. It sounds good, right? But where do you get more money to pay for that increased wage? Who pays that money? The government doesn't. But the businesses do. At least that's who usually makes money. While it might be nice to see more money in your weekly or monthly earnings, it does have a direct effect on businesses that want to employ more people. And this is specifically where we need to think about those who we might not keep in our mind when discussing items like the minimum wage. Who am I talking about? I'm not talking about corporations. But what I am talking about is from smallbusiness.cron.com. So, how raising minimum wages hurts U.S. employers. As of publication, the federal minimum wage was $7.25 per hour. Each state, of course, can enact its own minimum wage laws. Even cities can do that too. That will supersede the federal minimum wage, but only if the state's minimum wage is higher than the federal. A rise in the federal minimum wage can cause problems for American employers. That can lead to layoffs, budget cuts, and other financial changes. And this article obviously has a couple things that we'll go over. Labor costs, for example. An employer who has 20 employees making minimum wage will see a $10,000 annual increase in wage costs for every 25 cents the minimum pay is raised, according to the Employment Policies Institute. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce website, small businesses are at least able to absorb the thousands of dollars in additional labor costs that a minimum wage increase creates. Some solutions that small businesses can employ include reducing staff or cutting costs in other areas such as marketing. So that ultimately hurts the business. Pricing. The effects of the minimum wage on company bottom lines can cause a rise in consumer prices, according to the Balanced Politics website. The company profit margin is a financial indicator that is reported to shareholders and used to determine the financial health of an organization. If small businesses are faced with an increase in the minimum wage, they will need to find a way to absorb those extra costs and preserve their profit margins by raising prices to the customers. Nonprofit organizations use volunteers and employees to offer their services. According to the U.S. Department of Labor website, the Fair Labor Standards Act mandates that employees of nonprofit organizations are subject to minimum wage laws. A rise in the minimum wage can force nonprofits to spend more for labor to maintain the current level of services. And lastly, international competition. An increase in the U.S. minimum wage will force American small businesses to raise their prices on the international market. When foreign labor is less expensive than U.S. labor, it is difficult for small businesses to compete with international companies that import products into the United States. For example, the minimum wage in India as of 2009, when translated into American dollars, was about $2 a day, according to the Global March website. An average American minimum wage worker getting paid $7.25 per hour makes $58 per day for an 8-hour workday. As the minimum wage in the U.S. goes up, it becomes even more difficult to compete with foreign manufacturers. Interesting. So, really, as you can tell from my video here, basically, my concern is for the small businesses. Can small businesses really afford to pay people more money and still be able to turn a profit and keep their doors open? Some maybe yes, some maybe no. I do like, though, that smallbusiness.cron.com brings up the notion of international competition. With what we have currently, relative free trade, the cost of doing business can drastically go down if the business relocates or gets other items from where they can pay people less. That's the cost of relative free trade. There's a reason why many of American products, so-called American products, are actually made in China and Mexico. It just makes it cheaper for businesses to operate over there, take their jobs from America, move them over there. Businesses just follow the money. And that's a cost of relative free trade. So, but that's not the only thing, though. I do want to add some facts from Forbes. Small businesses struggling with $15 minimum wage, new site reports from 2017. So, last week, or from this timeline, from 2017, Senate Democrats introduced legislation to support a raise for minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024. Nearly 20 states have already raised minimum wage at the local level. While the Raise the Wage Act may have had positive intentions, which we just talked about this here in 2019, it could close many small businesses, according to the Employment Policies Institute, a nonprofit which launched its own campaign last week called Faces of $15, a website that chronicles the stories of small business owners throughout the U.S. who are struggling to keep up with all the minimum wage increases. The website contained 100 stories of small businesses that have been affected by the increased costs. The real faces of $15 are the business owners who've been forced to close their doors, and the employees who've lost their jobs, says Michael Saltzman, managing director at EPI. Policymakers shouldn't be fooled by labor's rose-colored rhetoric on a new wage mandate. According to the Small Business Administration, small businesses provide 55% of all jobs and 66% of all net new jobs since the 1970s in the U.S. 28 million small businesses account for 54% of all U.S. sales. In addition, 600,000 franchise small businesses in the U.S. are responsible for 8 million jobs. Add to that the real estate component. Small businesses in America are responsible for occupying an estimated 20 to 30 billion square feet of commercial space. The EPI argues that while it might be easy for corporations to adopt the $15 minimum wage, it's much more challenging for small businesses which form the backbone of the U.S. economy. LA, San Francisco, and Seattle have already adopted minimum wage hikes. LA is geared to have $15 minimum wage by 2021. Human Salem of Argyle House of Apparel in San Fernando, California, a city within the limits of LA County, said that he will be going to Nevada for expansion because of the state's minimum wage. He made the reason for this move public in the LA Times op-ed. The biggest reason is the minimum wage, which will rise to $15 by 2021 in the county and by 2022 statewide. I write with some hesitancy because I'm in no way an opponent of higher pay. When you have a company with fewer than 50 employees, you get to know them pretty well and have a genuine concern for them as individuals. But that has to be balanced with concern for keeping your clients who can always take their business to other countries or states. He then went to break down the economics of his company, which includes or employs 25 individuals. When the $15 minimum wage is fully phased in, my company would be losing in excess of $200,000 a year, and far more of my workforce grows as anticipated. That may be a drop in the bucket for large corporations, but a small business cannot absorb such losses. Today, it's cool to be a tech startup in Silicon Valley, but it's not to be an apparel industry startup in the San Fernando Valley. That needs to change. He even challenged the president to get more familiar with the reality of running a manufacturing business in the U.S. If President-elect Donald Trump is interested in learning more about the hurdles to adding manufacturing jobs in America, look at the Golden State's steep pay requirements. That would be a good place to start. That's why EPI has brought together stories of small businesses and their owners throughout the U.S. onto one central platform to put a face to the economics of it all. Interestingly, one of the stories highlights a profit-sharing business that has ironically now closed because of the minimum wage hikes. Kelly Ulmer, owner of Almost Perfect Books in Roseville, California, had a business model that was employee-friendly, offering shares of all profits to the employees each week. As the minimum wage increased, the profits decreased, she says. All of my employees actually made more money at $8 an hour than they do at $10 an hour because I actually had money to give them. In July 2016, she closed her store because of the ever-increasing minimum wage, she says. She's not alone. Nat Cutler, one of the owners of Abbott's Cellar in San Francisco, also had to close his doors when minimum wage went up, along with other business costs in the city. The stories are not limited to California, though. They are concentrated in states that already have made moves to raise minimum wage. So it begs the question, is $15 minimum wage actually a good idea? According to Salem, California is putting up the going out of business sign. It's a tragedy. So, wow. As we can see, small businesses are important for America. They provide over half of all jobs since the 1970s, and 66% of all net new jobs. Over half of all U.S. sales come from small businesses. We need to keep small business owners in mind because they still form the backbone of the American economy. Now you could ask yourself, what does it cost for a business to hire a new employee, and why can't they just eat the costs? Well, that's because of all the things we don't see when we actually do raise the minimum wage. So, from quickbooks.intuit.com, the true cost of paying an employee. Very short read. The true cost of paying each of your employees is significantly higher than their hourly rate. Even if you don't offer benefits or even paid vacation, there are some unavoidable taxes and expenses you'll incur having employees on your payroll. For example, Social Security tax. The tax you pay as an employer funds Social Security benefits. For 2017, you'll pay 6.2% on each employee's wages up to $128,400. After an employee's annual wages exceed that amount, no more tax is levied, so there is a cost from Social Security. There's another cost from Medicare tax. These contributions go towards the general Medicare fund. For 2017, you'll pay 1.45% of each employee's salary as Medicare tax. Unlike Social Security, there's no wage-based limit for the Medicare tax. However, you do need to withhold an additional 0.9% from each employee's paycheck after the person's wages exceed $200,000 in a calendar year. That's not a huge addition, but this still is a small cost. Federal Unemployment Tax Act. The Federal Unemployment Insurance System, along with the state systems, funds benefit payments for unemployed workers. For 2017, the FUTA rate is 6% of the first $7,000 of employee wages. State unemployment tax. Along with the federal unemployment tax, you may be subject to a state unemployment tax. Tax rates and policies vary by state. Luckily, employers can take a credit for the state unemployment tax they pay against the FUTA tax. The maximum credit is currently 5.4%, and there are of course other expenses, especially when you bring on an employee. All states require that you purchase workers' compensation insurance once you have someone on your payroll. Of course, rates vary by state, but I guess a 2014 report from the state of Oregon noted that the median rate is around $1.85 per $100 of payroll, or 1.85% of an employee's salary. If you're in California, you could pay up to 3.5% of total wages to cover workers' compensation. These are just the costs of hiring an employee. It's more than just their hourly rate. Look, it just ain't cheap to run a business. Yes, a business could make thousands of millions of dollars, but for small business owners, a single employee, like what I just showed you, can be expensive. And these added taxes and expenses per employee, as we can see from, of course, QuickBooks, just eat at the business, who could potentially pay people more money or even hire more people if they didn't have to meet these extra obligations. Now, I'm not saying that people should not be paid more, but I gotta say, we need to look at as many sides as possible to understand what's really going to happen if we do raise minimum wage. Now, when the House voted to raise the minimum wage, that doesn't mean it's law. Apparently, the Senate needs to either say yes to this or say no, where it'll most likely say no. But regardless, I just want people to, in the end, be able to afford things and live their life. But just look at the reality of our situation and do the best that we can. Now, I'm going to leave you with my final thoughts about the federal minimum wage. So, because the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour since 2009, the government should raise it, in my opinion, to the minimum level of a single state. Now, that may not be very clear, but let me explain. If all states raise their minimum wage to like $9, then the federal government could set that $9 minimum wage to be the new federal minimum wage. The federal government, in this case, should lead from behind, because paying people the same wage doesn't make sense when you compare the cost of living between cities like Los Angeles to like a rural town in Arkansas or Georgia. You know, that just doesn't make sense to have these people paid the same wage. But, or if you want to get really crazy, you could just have a lot of fun and get rid of the minimum wage altogether and just see what happens. Some European states have done that, and they've actually been fairly successful. But regardless, I hope you guys learned something here today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm Brazen Eagle, and I hope you have a great day.